Sure. Thank you for inviting me. It's so special to just take a moment from a working week and actually tune back into to a particular plant, especially one that because of the seasonal nature of plants, we might be less aware of because it's not speaking so loudly at this time of year. So it's really nice to kind of pay attention to it now in my thinking. What is Heather doing now?
Mm,
Because it is so much for me a summer plant, even though, of course, the cycle of it is going on just as our own cycles are going on. Some louder and more flamboyant than others in different moments.
mm,
Um, I'm a forager and a researcher of plants, taking a quite ethnobotanical stance, very much interested in how working with plants and living alongside them was embedded in local community knowledge, and trying to find a way of strengthening those ties now for modern communities, and doing that here in Scotland, where despite the access to land and the abundance of still quite wild nature, there is quite a few blocks in place. There are quite a few blocks in place that seem to stop the very people who would have once been foragers, which was those with the least, those for kind of pushed down the social system, who often don't have access for various reasons. So it's trying to explore what are the blocks that stop people having access to the land and the benefit of its food and its medicine, because there's so much there, and we've really lost touch with that. So that's the work here in Scotland, and I do that through an organization I started called Plant Listening, which is a community interest company, and we work with different marginalized groups around Scotland, working with charities that support them, and then taking those groups out to walk into some very wild places, but also very much their local park, their local surroundings. It doesn't have to be glamorous, and just seeing what's there. It's really about altering attention more than anything. It's not about filling a basket and taking it home. Of course, lots of these people live in places that are quite polluted now, so you can't necessarily eat the plants that are there or the seaweeds. But what you can do always is slow down and learn to look, and to, beyond looking, really feel and engage all of those senses. And that's, I think, what listening encompasses. It's not just about listening with the ears, it's about allowing our bodies to uh, reconnect to the very fine attunement we have to our environment and all of these messages that we're being given by a living world, that the noise of our human world is so loud that they block them out. And with that, we lose access to this regulating system, that can make, well, in my experience, is really the only thing that makes life manageable.
mhm.
The human world is very fraught and increasingly fast. So being able to remember that we have tethers into a different system that's running at a much slower pace is one that I've found incredibly helpful on a personal level, and I hope is helpful for other people too. But I also run walks, ticketed walks as well, in beautiful places like Blair Athol, which is where
Mm.
we met.
Yeah, I've definitely had the pleasure of walking with you, and I can vouch for the fact that it was a very slow walk because every step in a beautiful way, there was just so much to explore. And really that slowing down and literally every step just stopping and saying, what is this that I might walk past every day?
Yeah,
And what does that, kind of say? I just remember not going a very short distance over quite a few hours with you in the group, and it was really, really beautiful. And I guess that really leads into Heather as well, because I mean, we both live in Scotland. I know certainly the hills around me speak year out, or throughout the whole year. And Heather to me is one of those big, big voices here because it's just ever present. And yeah, so I'd really love to. I've got my own feelings about Heather, and kind of how I think about it, but I'd love to hear from you. And I guess this is as much about how much do we know in our heads, but also in our hearts and in our soul, and that whole breadth of understanding Heather. So um, I know you've been writing a bit about Heather as well. So I just want to say, you know, what would you like to say about Heather? I'm all ears and would love to share it. So yeah.
Oh, it's always sensitive speaking on behalf of the plants, right? Like always so aware that we are experiencing them through, a highly subjective lens. And there's a lot of beautiful writing out there about connecting with plants, but sometimes I think it can stray into slightly dangerous territory where we speak on behalf of the plants. And one writer I think who really has circumnavigated that beautifully is Diana Beresford Kruger in her book To Speak for the Trees, which she names that in the title. But what's wonderful is she doesn't then say this is what the tree is, or
Mm,
this is what it's saying. What she does is tune into the collective wisdom, which is for her the Celtic Irish tradition, and that's embedded within the tradition of the Ogham or the Ogham, of which heather is one of the trees mentioned in the tree alphabet, which is a great curiosity, and which is really where I began
mm,
thinking, well, why is heather, which is not something I would consider a tree when I was thinking about it, included in a list of trees. And admittedly, there is a couple of other curveballs in there. There's rush that's in there and ivy too. And so really it became apparent through the research that this list of trees were not just a category of, trees that had to be a certain height to be considered a tree, but plants that had some relation to to the world of trees and how humans were interacting with them. So I think our interaction with them is key. And I think that's where, from everything you've said, this is the beginning of the basis of research. It's not trying to think of like, who are you objectively, although that's a beautiful question to ask anyone and everything.
mm,
And we should say, who are you all the time to the plants? And saying that to Heather is a wonderful way of walking through it. Who are you? Who are you? And it just goes on and on in these open hills. And it will give its answer, primarily chemically. It's telling you who it is through the way it's emanating, and it's giving out its medicine and its fragrance and the colors, and its structure and its the embodiment of it. So I think while it's wonderful to think about the essence of a plant or like its energy, we learn so much through its wholeness
mm,
too, its very presence. Um, so I think that's where I have a real focus on. Let's begin with our senses, not just saying what do we feel. And I study tracking alongside foraging, and this is what my tracking teacher was always very clear about, was like, don't tell me where you think the animal is because you can feel it. Show me the evidence.
mm,
Where are his feet gone in the ground? Because that animal is a real
mm,
living thing and it's gone somewhere.
mm,
And that was so helpful for me in thinking about this kind of inquiry is let's really look at what is happening here.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and so that was the kind of beginning way in with Heather. Well, why is this part of the a wider ecology? And then through that thinking and then later understanding through conversations and more research that heather is, of course, it is basically it's the predecessor of the forest. So it's coming first. And this then has led to my thinking of heather as I wrote a piece about it recently called Matrix Silva, which is matrix is the Latin for womb, silver is the Latin for forest or the woods. So it's the womb of the woods, it's the womb of the forest. And from this place, really began to experience and explore Heather through a very maternal lens. Okay, well, what is this idea of birthing? And what does Heather do that lets us into an understanding of the natural world, opening up a space that is all about succession? Because this is a word within ecology that's often used. This is a succession plant. It will give rise to something else beyond it. And eventually, if it's allowed to do that and it's not kept in check by fire or grazed, which is one of the things in Scotland that is an issue, that the deer are grazing what is trying, and the sheep and the cattle, what is trying to come up. And so the heather can't give birth to what it wants to give birth to. It actually just keeps giving birth to itself, which is no bad thing because it gives so much medicine and so much beauty and so much protection for so many other heath animals and creates or is part of this vital landscape of the heath, which is very important in and of itself. Um, but there's something there that was sort of this place that has been this idea of the matrix and the womb is really where I have continued to circle with Heather and this really beautiful then reflection that it leads back into the human world from my perspective of okay, well, where can this plant teach us about what we want to give birth to? And like in the true mothering tradition, birth, it means death because you're going to give away of yourself and something's going to die in the process that you're giving rise to something new. So a hugely sacrificial love is at play um, in these rolling ecologies. If they're not uh, distorted because of arrested succession, which is again, this is a human imprint that we've brought in. So we've brought in a distortion into a system that otherwise would be changing, growing, evolving.
Mm. That is so, so beautiful. I all of a sudden just see Heather in that womb-like picture that you've painted, and I've not thought about it in that way. And listening to you describe that, I wonder, I mean, what happens? What is it trying to give birth to if it's not kept in check, like you've said? You know, what is that natural state of continuing if it's not grazed or controlled through fire? What happens?
So Heather, it's really beautiful what it the growth cycle of it. It's it's quite long. It takes about 25 years to kind of reach its maturity. Um, but it grows up and it sends forth a little shoot and then it starts to spread outwards and it starts to grow laterally. And at this point, it kind of shades out anything else around it. So it just is growing its own space. And at this point, it's very green, very, very bushy.
Mhm.
It will start to flower after a few years. And then these flowers, we can talk about that after. Like, this is really the primary, one of the medicines of heather that is so extraordinary to anyone walking through the landscape of heather. But it then starts to open out over time and it starts to become a little more craggy. So here we have a beautiful mirroring in the development of whether the myth or the mythos of the feminine, of like, the singular upright child, and then this sort of blossomy, bloomy maiden, and then this opening out, thinning out, cragging out, the being that then starts to let light through, um, starts to let light through, and then this starts to allow mosses and things to grow underneath it, which really thrive in the warmth of the contained environment it creates with its branches. And then it starts to die back and it becomes gray and a bit withered. And then in this space, with all of this space, and then this lovely bed of like warm, receptive moss, and it starts then to the ground is prepared for little shoots to start coming up, and that will usually be these pioneer trees of
Mhm.
birch and rowan and willow. And this is this wonderful sort of story of development that goes on. And it's also doing something because it's happy, heather thrives on really acid ground. Apparently, as acidic as a lemon is what it wants, like really acidic soil. It's happy there.
Okay.
And so it will, through its years and time of being there, and through this allowing of moss to start growing there, it helps to make it more alkali. So it's preparing the ground enough for then the pioneer trees to come. And the birch will do its thing, particularly in its leaf fall, of then letting through its leaf fall, really bringing a more alkaline presence, which will then allow the following bigger
Mm.
trees to come and the forest to arrive. It will,
Mm.
long process, but it's
Yeah.
all giving rise to itself.
Okay. And do we still see that in Scotland now in untouched areas? Because I certainly don't think I've seen it close by, but it must still exist, right?
The places you'll see it are where there is, rewilding efforts going on. So usually in a place, if you fence anywhere,
Mm,
after a while, the seeds will be carried in of the
okay.
birch, in particular in the rowan, and then that will start. They will then start to grow because the heather will have been there long enough that the ground is long prepared
Mm,
now. Like it's all ready
yeah.
in most places to go. It was
Mm,
very long ago that these places were originally cleared
mm,
for agriculture. So, it was human intervention that got rid of the trees in most of the places, but
yeah.
it doesn't take long for
Yeah.
trees to come back. That doesn't mean that it all should go. And there's some wonderful defense, from talking and walking with, particularly with the hill stalkers here in Scotland, who the open hill is their world, and they've learned to hunt without trees.
Mm,
Um, and however problematic that might be for people in terms of hunting, um, they really know the beauty of those landscapes in a way that many other people don't because they walk them and they walk, it's hard walking
mm,
and they don't necessarily think, it would be more beautiful or better if the whole thing was covered in trees. So I think a balance is
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, and listening to you there, just about talking about this, I want to say purpose, but it's deeper than that. I guess it's the relationship Heather has with its surrounding. I'm interested in the relational aspects, like how does it do relationship? If that's a kind of good enough question to ask. So because obviously
That's
it's
a good
in
question.
relationship all the time. Yeah.
Mm. Oh, it's so nice. I mean, yeah, lovely question. I mean, off the top of my head, it's providing so much cover, for all of those ground nesting birds, which anyone, walking over, you're always disturbing them. Sometimes the birds will come up and you realize they have this wonderful subterranean life. And going back to what I was saying about the Ogham, what I started to realize the more time I spent with heather was that when you lie down in heather, you start to see it's a mini tree. It's a bonsai tree. It's like a tiny forest. If you alter your perspective, it becomes a forest. It's just that we're so high up, we see it like tiny broccoli heads. But as soon as you lie down and get in amongst it, it's like, oh my goodness, this is completely its own world for the insects, for the birds, and of course for the hill dwelling animals, particularly for the deer, and of course the sheep. Where I live here in Galloway on a sheep farm, the sheep bed down in the heather up on the hill and it keeps them safe all through winter. So it's this thing of heather being a place of rest is another really key thing that's come up for me in my research with heather, that it is inviting rest. And I think that's again probably a common experience for many walkers. There comes a point when you're tired and you can just lie down in the heather and it holds you. And it doesn't just hold you in like the way the ground holds you. Like you can fall onto heather, like you can jump and land on it, and it will like spring and hold you exactly like a bed and exactly like a mother holding a baby's head. And how precious it is for us as adults to be held by the world like that with that immense tenderness, that softness. And I think that's what heather does. It strikes me in the way it creates this shelter
Mm,
for humans, for animals. Um, and of course, then for we, as we've talked about this growth of mosses, and then this protecting of these or these. It's not so much a protector because it wouldn't stop them from grazing, but it's like a
yeah.
incubator of new growth. And of course, then taken into the human realm, heather was absolutely in this harsh northern climates, absolutely vital for people in building their dwellings. So heather was used both for thatching and for bedding. It was used to cover the roofs of houses, and because its long stalks made it very good to thatch, and it's very brisk, those that
Mm,
tight bunching. It was very waterproof, and that would cover the houses. And of course, they didn't have in the islands in particular, there was absolutely nothing else that you could use to thatch. And then they would make their beds with it too. And heather beds, there's wonderful accounts of people sleeping on these heather beds, box frames built, and then the heather tops tightly packed. You would sleep on the tops, and they were so tightly packed that it was like a springy mattress, and this wonderful
Wow.
rest that would come from that space.
Mm,
And the heather thatch actually in many places in the islands and highlands here in Scotland is really interesting because it was part of this wider loop of transhumance migration that would go on between villagers who every summer would then take their animals up to the shalings, up to these dwellings up in the hills where
mm,
there was fresh air and better grazing, um, and lots more heather. And the men would stay behind in the main and then take off all the heather thatch that was then impregnated with soot. And they would dig this into their food beds, the lazy beds as they were called, which were there, where they were just about managing to grow enough, mainly oats, but of some vegetables too,
mm,
to keep them going through winter. And so the heather was this like unbelievable support system. It was covering them, it was protecting them from the elements, it was
yeah.
holding them at night, and it was helping them to then have enough food to come. So like completely embedded
Mm,
in their well-being, which again, I think just is another string to this bow of a narrative about this maternal
yeah.
gift that this plant is.
Yeah. And do you think because it's so abundant, it really is so abundant where we are, do you think we've lost a bit of that connection and relationship with it? And and I kind of almost want to ask a very naive question, why? Would we lose that connection with it if
Mhm.
it's so close to us, and still so incredibly useful? Yeah, just a broad question. I wonder why we have lost that connection. Um, we see the beauty, we see the color all around us, but I wonder how far we still go in that relationship. And that's a personal question, probably for all of us.
Mm. No, I think it's the question in a way, and I don't think it's naive at all. I think it's one of those questions that are so big and so simple that everyone stopped even thinking to ask, And the
Mm,
problem is it is extraordinary that Heather is like, I think you just said it, like it's enjoyed for its beauty as a background. It's like a
mm,
backdrop. Like, isn't it
yeah.
pretty out there as this kind of wash of color occasionally? And I picked up a thing of, Scottish heather tea and
Mm,
was like, oh, amazing. Someone's actually using heather in it for its medicinal purpose. And it was like a box of black tea that Camellia sinensis that comes from not anywhere near here. And it had a little tiny bit of heather in it.
wow.
But it was like, that's not a medicinal preparation. Like, that's not going to give you access to the medicine of heather. And okay, that might tune you in a little bit to its benefit, but also, why are you buying heather tea? Like, there's literally, wherever you go in Scotland, heather everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
there's some things that are worth buying because they're hard to gather or whatever, but like, there's
Mm,
no reason why there should be bunches of heather hanging on every, village corner that people could
yeah.
just come and
Yeah.
take it to their house and use whenever they need it. So
Mm,
the
mm,
the why is huge and it underscores so much of my it sits around everything I do, why have we got to this place?
yeah.
And it's a question we could go into for some time, but it will probably
Yeah.
take us a bit off beast. But I guess the thing is, well, I
Mm,
guess my work is about, well, how can we bring it back?
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think what you're doing is absolutely vital because it's really just making this information more known and talking about it because there is stuff written down in books, but most people living now in Scotland have absolutely no idea of the medicinal
Mm,
benefits of heather. And that's, what's nuts about that is you don't even with heather, you don't have to do anything. Going for a walk
yeah.
over flowering heather is medicinal. Like
It
it's
is the
just the most
medicine.
beautiful thing. And now that is understood because of the methylarbitin, like this, that's contained within the flowers.
Mm,
It is like being released every time you walk over the flowering heather, those little bells are shaking,
mm,
and it's the most perfect ratio because actually taken in high doses in and of itself, if you drank heather nectar, like it would be way too strong on the body.
yeah.
But when it's then released as an aerosol
Hmm.
and mingled with the sweetness of the generally constantly, softly blowing wind here in Scotland, you get this
Mm,
inhale, and that is then coating and lining the lungs, and it's
mm,
helping heal them. Um,
yeah.
so it's
Wow.
it's just also so there, and then of course embedded within the body of the plant as well, within its the leaves and the stalks. You can make a tea with it, and that's just gently infusing it. But as with any wooden plant that's got a woodiness to it, an infusion is okay, but ideally just a light decoction, just simmering it for a little while just to draw out more medicine from it. And that's the most beautiful, not only very relaxing for the nervous system, but if you have any UTIs, it has a very special relationship with the bladder. And so it's gentle enough, the medicine, to just wash and clean out any
Yeah.
infections. So people suffering with UTIs and things like that, it's an extraordinary gift.
Yeah. And would you say, because we're kind of talking under that umbrella of it's medicine now, and I totally resonate with the walking in the hills as something without even knowing, cerebrally what it does, I can definitely feel that. So, but it's medicine in terms of its history of being used as a medicine and question mark today. I don't think very much. But so you said UTI, the calming of the nervous system. Is it something
Mhm.
about the lungs? Like, what is all that medicine that Heather offers us?
So it really is almost every aspect of the plant is medicinal, which is extraordinary, and it's it is literally contained within the bells of the flowering heather, and all three heathers will give this to you. So that's another thing. Like I assume your central focus is ling heather, Calluna vulgaris,
Calluna
but
Vulgaris.
yeah. But then you also have the two ericas,
Mm-hmm.
bell heather and cross-leaved heath, and all of them actually contain these medicinal qualities, but it's ling heather that has the most. So it's the ling heather is the one that will is the most potently medicinal and is the most common. So it's the one that you find the most.
Mm,
But it is just this extraordinary structure embedded within the body of the plant that it will, as you move through it, as you crush it. And again, here, this is such a maternal thing. Like, as you lie on me, as you break me, I will give you sustenance.
yeah. Yeah.
That is what the mothering love, and this does not have to be about, related to gender or anything. It's about sacrificial love.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I will love you and I will give to you medicine even as you break me. And this is something that I find like, oh, it almost makes me cry when I think about the way the
Yeah.
plants do this, because it is something that's so overlooked in our world where everything is so built on this like very harsh series of exchange, and this idea of like you have to pay for everything. And it's like, and also that love, we're so taught, particularly in the new age, that like, we have to like take care of ourselves, first. And it's actually like they're being given this example by the natural world where it's like, don't be afraid to like give until you break open and then see what happens. And like medicine will rush out and you will be supported then by this a wider energy underneath us. It seems it's almost, yeah, a
Yeah.
modern fear of like we have to protect ourselves because we have limited energy, limited resources, this model of scarcity rather
Yeah.
than like it just will
Mm,
keep giving. There's
yeah.
so much more than enough. And
Mm,
of course, I need to check this by, referencing particularly within foraging and modern concerns around taking that, of course, if everyone went out and was like taking like crazy, then there are certain resources that would be massively depleted. But there's also a way of taking carefully and making sure you only leave, you leave plenty
Mm,
behind, and sharing.
yeah.
Uh, and what's beautiful here is like with the medicine of heather and the fact that the flowers contain this nectar that then is like as it's shaken then like becomes an aerosol and like is shaken free and then is absorbed into our lungs and helps us to heal. Like
Amazing.
it's just doing it
Yeah.
of its own accord. It's just
Yeah. Yeah, with nothing in
innumerable.
return. I guess the question is almost, can we be open to this generosity? Isn't that our challenge mostly? Can we even do that? And I really hear the theme of scarcity versus the kind of almost the lesson of abundance that is right
Mhm.
in front of our eyes, literally. And I just wonder if there's a theme in there. I guess I'm thinking about lessons, but lessons sounds almost too cold as well. But what can we learn? And I almost feel like that scarcity theme is something that sits deeply within Heather as maybe something it wants to teach us,
Mm.
um, or can
I
tell us, and it's trying to tell us all the time. Look at me, there's so much. Have you seen how much there is? Have you seen how much you've got? Will you have it? Can I give it to you? All the way. I'm almost seeing the little hands of Heather through the hill going, here you
Yeah,
go, here you go, here you go.
exactly. Just like endlessly giving and unafraid, for us in this moment of such fear in terms of succession and what's to become of humanity and our lives in this stage of, you know, climatic shift and potential collapse. And I really think there's something very powerful there. And like, we have to trust these wider systems. And this is a rewilding of the self. It's like there's also a lot of that in here of like, there's the earth is regulating itself, and that is going to be chaotic
Hmm.
just as that was chaotic for many creatures on a tiny scale every day. We are part of a process, and it is very frightening. But if we can really tune into this idea of like abundant love and like it's just something else will come, and can we allow that with grace and generosity and just
Yeah.
wherever you are with whatever you have inside you, like give what is yours to give. And
Oh, you're back now. I lost you
oh,
there for a little bit.
sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
yeah.
that's okay. That's okay. We were just talking about that. Yeah, the lesson of, I guess, the giving
Yeah.
of oneself as well. So no, that was perfect. I can't believe we've done 40 minutes already, and I'm
Oh
just
my gosh, have we? Wow, I
yeah,
think
I know. So
that's
I just
wild.
I think I've just been listening to kind of those because I'm really interested in those themes, and it's the generosity, the giving. Can we receive? Can we see what's right in front of us, and all of that? But um, there's one thought I just quickly, if I can get your thoughts on that. Um, Heather is so abundant, that there are some questions about: is it kind of taking over? Is it harming the environment around it because it is so abundant and it will just take over? It's just a question that has come up along the way. Or is that part of its beauty in terms of that abundance?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. Yeah, and I'm always curious about the language that's used in these
Mm,
ecological concerns of like taking over invasive species,
yeah.
you know, like it's from my understanding, like a plant will only live in an ecological niche, right? Like there has to be space for it in order for it to grow. And so if heather is there, then it's because there's space for it to be there. There's like there's room that it's like, okay, I will move in here.
Hmm.
And I think we have to trust those cycles. Like they don't we they are so much bigger than us and beyond us and often born of our blind behaviors. We cleared these trees and these hills for our own needs and survival, and there's no judgment in that. But Heather is now existing and living in balance with humans around us. I think the circling back to what we talked about earlier in the conversation, the fact that it shows how quickly it can regenerate, if allowed
Yeah.
to my mind, and I'm not a trained ecologist, so this is from my own subjective mm, observations. But if heather is allowed to then do what it wants to do, which is give itself up, it's not taking over, it's just laying the groundwork for what can come next. But there is a distortion in the number of animals, and so it can't always do that. Um, but I don't, maybe it is something that needs to be kept in check. I just, whenever I come across efforts, whether then having to try and kill animals or kill plants to try and keep numbers down to what humans have decided is the correct balance, I hear alarm bells, because I think
Yeah.
we have not done a good job in doing that so far. And I think better to leave
Mm.
wider systems to work that out for themselves, is my personal opinion.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you. And as I say, those are just questions I'm coming across in some of my
Mm,
reading and research as well, which is
yeah.
interesting. Although I felt a bit of a resistance to the question, I wanted
Mm,
to add it in there as well. Um,
yeah.
I think I'm kind of want to end and in a way, how do I phrase? If you could leave people who are listening with one invitation or one kind of action, for lack of a better word, invitation, let's call it invitation, where it comes to heather, what would that be? um
I would say to rest with it, to take yourself out and make yourself comfortable, and really lay down and rest alongside it, and use that time of rest to alter your perspective, get down on the ground, which is really helpful for us as humans to get off our high horses and lie down and see it from a different angle, and allow it to show you how comfortable it is to be in bed outside. You're protected from the wind, you are held, and let that time of noticing and feeling held be a time of being reminded that we're also being beheld. There'll be lots of other creatures around who are witnessing you, and the heather also, in its own way, is aware of your presence, if only because you're crushing it at that moment, but it's
Yeah.
still going to be giving you what it can. And take some home and make some tea and drink it that night, and feel it within. And I really think noticing is everything, because the plants, as we're experiencing, they will communicate with us in their way. We don't, it's a way beyond a mental process.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
completely embodied thing.
Okay. I want to take that invitation up and not spend, any more time at my desk today and just
Yeah.
go and just, but it's, that time of the year now where it's obviously not colorful at the moment, so it's in a different phase. Can I
Mm.
still, make tea with it in its current form, or, is there a difference when it's beautiful and full of color, and when obviously it fades away? Is there a difference in the way that we can interact with it in those different seasons as well?
Yeah, I mean, of course, anything when it's in its youth and its springtime is going to have
Mm.
more more medicine in it.
Okay.
But you can still, or even just to cut some and take it home and just have it in your space, and just to
Mm.
reflect and look at it and be with it. It's, remembering that this is its moment. It's reaching that time of its cycle. It's craggy, it's wintry, it's waiting, and it's going to very, very soon start sending forth its new green shoots. So
Mm.
it's not dead. It's just
No.
moving through its annual cycle. It's very much alive. It's just at the kind of, this is maybe one of the problem with our culture, right? Is that we perceive what's elderly to be dying and lacking in potency, rather than giving us information of
Mm.
a different kind of wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I think I could carry on and I'll probably have loads more questions, but
Oh, it's so
I'm
nice.
so sure that's going to be so useful for others to listen to and really useful for me. I've got yeah, more strands to research now, but Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to just stop the recording.